June 4th, 1942. The vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beneath a blazing morning sun. Somewhere northeast of Midway Atoll, American carrier groups braced for a battle that would decide the fate of the Pacific War. Above the restless waves, the air war had already begun. Fighter pilots spoke in hushed tones about speed, maneuverability, and survival. In those skies, reputation meant everything. And among the aircraft deployed that day, one machine carried a reputation that bordered on ridicule. Heavy, slow, outdated. Some pilots even called it a flying coffin, yet within hours, that same aircraft, and the man flying it, would rewrite expectations in the most violent way imaginable. 3 enemy fighters, among the deadliest in the world, would fall from the sky in flames. Little did they know, what happened next would become legendary. The aircraft in question was the Grumman F-4F Wildcat. By 1942, it had already seen combat across the Pacific, but compared to its primary adversary, the Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0, the Wildcat seemed inferior in almost every measurable way. The Zero was faster, it could climb more quickly, and in a turning fight, it was nearly unbeatable. American pilots knew this all too well. Many had already faced the Zero in earlier engagements, from Pearl Harbor to the Coral Sea. Reports came back with a common warning: do not dogfight the Zero on its terms. The Wildcat, by contrast, was rugged but sluggish. Its radial engine gave it durability, but also bulk. Its armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, advantages in survivability, only made it heavier. Pilots joked about it in ready rooms. "Try turning in that thing," one aviator had once said. "You'll be dead before you finish the arc." But not all shared that sentiment. Among those who flew the Wildcat were men who understood its hidden strengths. It could absorb punishment that would tear lighter aircraft apart. Its guns, 6 50 caliber machine guns, delivered devastating firepower. And in the right hands, its stability could be an asset rather than a liability. One such pilot was a lieutenant assigned to a carrier-based fighter squadron operating from the USS Enterprise. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, nor the most decorated, at least, not yet. But he had something others sometimes lacked: patience, discipline, and a willingness to fight differently. As the American fleet closed in on the Japanese carrier force near Midway, tensions mounted. Intelligence had revealed the enemy's approach. The stage was set for a confrontation that would define the war. And high above the ocean, that confrontation would soon become deeply personal. By 0700 hours, American radar operators detected incoming Japanese aircraft. Within minutes, flight decks erupted into controlled chaos as fighters were scrambled into the sky. Wildcats roared off carrier decks, one after another, clawing for altitude. The lieutenant's squadron climbed steadily, forming loose defensive formations. Their orders were clear: intercept incoming enemy aircraft and protect the fleet at all costs. At 7,000 feet, visibility stretched for miles. The ocean below shimmered, deceptively calm. But ahead, faint specks began to form against the horizon. Enemy aircraft. By 0735 hours, those specks resolved into a familiar and feared shape: sleek, agile fighters with distinctive rounded wings. Zeros. There were more than expected. At least 9 of them, flying in coordinated formation. The lieutenant adjusted his course slightly, signaling his wingman. The radio crackled with brief, tense communications. There was no time for long discussions. Decisions had to be instant. The Japanese pilots had already spotted them. Within seconds, the sky erupted. Zeros dove from above with incredible speed, their engines screaming as they closed the distance. The American formation scattered, each pilot maneuvering to avoid becoming an easy target. The lieutenant resisted the instinct to turn sharply. He had been warned. Turning with a Zero was suicide. Instead, he pushed the nose down slightly, gaining speed. His Wildcat shuddered as it accelerated, diving just enough to build momentum. A Zero streaked past his left side, guns flashing. Tracer rounds ripped through the air, missing him by mere feet. The lieutenant held his course, calm, controlled. He knew the Zero would try to outmaneuver him, to force a turning engagement. That was where it excelled. But he had no intention of playing that game. By 0740 hours, the engagement had devolved into multiple one-on-one dogfights scattered across the sky. American pilots struggled to keep up with the nimble Japanese fighters. Several Wildcats were already trailing smoke. The lieutenant spotted one of his squadron mates in trouble, chased by 2 Zeros. Without hesitation, he climbed slightly, positioning himself above the fight. Timing was everything. He waited, Just a few seconds more. Then, he dove. The first attack came fast. The lieutenant lined up his sights on the trailing Zero. The enemy pilot was focused entirely on his target, unaware of the danger descending from above. At 300 yards, the lieutenant opened fire. 6 machine guns erupted in unison, the Wildcat shaking under the recoil. A stream of 50 caliber rounds tore through the Zero's fuselage. The effect was immediate. Flames burst from the engine cowling. The aircraft lurched violently before spiraling downward toward the ocean. One down, but there was no time to celebrate. The second Zero broke off its pursuit and turned toward him. Now the roles were reversed. The Japanese pilot pulled into a tight turn, attempting to get behind the Wildcat. The lieutenant felt the G-forces press him into his seat as he rolled and dove, trying to maintain speed. The Zero closed in. It was faster in the climb, more agile in the turn. The distance shrank rapidly. Bullets struck the Wildcat's fuselage, the sound sharp and metallic. The cockpit vibrated as rounds tore through parts of the aircraft. Warning lights flickered. For a moment, it seemed inevitable. He was outmatched, outnumbered, and running out of options. Fear gripped him, but only for a second. Training took over. Instead of turning, he executed a sudden dive, pushing the aircraft to its limits. The Wildcat plunged toward the ocean, gaining speed with every passing second. The Zero followed, but this was the mistake. At high speeds, the Zero's controls became less responsive. Its lightweight design, so advantageous in turning fights, now worked against it. The lieutenant pulled up sharply at the last moment. The Wildcat responded with surprising stability. The Zero struggled to match the maneuver. For a brief instant, it overshot. That was all the lieutenant needed. He rolled, brought his guns to bear, and fired. The second Zero exploded into fragments, pieces scattering across the sky. 2 down. But the fight was far from over. As he climbed back to altitude, another Zero appeared on his tail. This one was different, more cautious, more deliberate. It didn't rush the attack. Instead, it stayed just out of range, waiting for the perfect moment. The lieutenant checked his instruments. Fuel was dropping, ammunition was limited, and the sky around him was thinning. Fewer friendly aircraft remained. For a moment, everything seemed lost. What happened next would define the entire engagement. The lieutenant realized he couldn't outturn or outrun the Zero. So he changed the fight entirely. Instead of evading, he baited. He slowed slightly, presenting what appeared to be a vulnerable target. The Zero took the opportunity, closing in aggressively. At 200 yards, the Japanese pilot opened fire. Tracer rounds streaked past the Wildcat. At the last possible moment, the lieutenant rolled inverted and dropped sharply, forcing the Zero to commit to the attack. Then he performed a maneuver rarely attempted at such speeds, a rolling scissors. The Wildcat twisted and turned in tight vertical arcs, forcing the Zero into a series of rapid directional changes. The Japanese aircraft struggled to keep up. Each turn bled its energy. Each adjustment reduced its advantage. Within seconds, the tables turned. The Zero, once the hunter, now found itself struggling to maintain position. The lieutenant seized the moment. He cut across the Zero's path, anticipating its movement. For a split second, the enemy aircraft filled his gun sight. He fired. The impact was devastating. Rounds tore through the cockpit and engine. The Zero burst into flames, its trajectory collapsing into a downward spiral. 3 Zeros, 3 kills, in a machine once mocked as a slow sled. By 0830 hours, the skies over Midway began to clear. The immediate threat had passed, but the battle itself was far from over. Dive bombers and torpedo planes would soon play their part in one of the most decisive naval engagements in history. The lieutenant returned to his carrier with a damaged aircraft, low fuel, and nearly empty guns. But he returned alive. Of the 9 Zeros encountered that morning, 3 had fallen to him alone. His actions had not only saved a fellow pilot, but also demonstrated something crucial. The Wildcat was not inferior, it was misunderstood. When used correctly, leveraging speed, durability, and disciplined tactics, it could stand against the best the enemy had to offer. Reports of the engagement spread quickly through the fleet. Pilots who once mocked the aircraft began to reconsider. Tactics evolved, confidence grew, and in the months that followed, those lessons would contribute to shifting the balance of air power in the Pacific. The lieutenant would later receive official recognition for his actions, commendations that acknowledged both his skill and his courage under fire. But perhaps more important than any medal was the legacy he left behind. A lesson written not in words, but in fire and steel. Against impossible odds, in a machine others doubted, He had proven that victory was not determined solely by speed or agility. It was determined by the pilot, by discipline, by understanding one's strengths and exploiting the enemy's weaknesses. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War.